For our COBT viewers and listeners, it's Maynard and Mike here with something we've been really looking forward to, which is a visit with Dr. Francesco Sassi. Dr. Sassi is an acclaimed geopolitical energy expert. He's someone we've gotten to know over the last few months. He's someone we've been following. He really tunes into, I told Mike as a pregame, we can ask about any energy, geopolitical, you name the hotspot. Dr. Sassi has thought about it, written about it, and is examining it. He's really trying to bring a fulsome analysis to all these geopolitical situations, and there's almost always an energy subtext to so many of these things. So, Dr. Sassi, we're delighted to have you. Thanks so much for making the time.
Thanks for the invitation and the incredible presentation you made of me.
Well, it's easy to do when you've done as many things as you have. Mike, before we jump in with Dr. Sassi, what would you tell us about what's happening in the world?
It's probably going to be the first time I've said this in quite a bit of time, but the markets are pretty neutral, pretty flattish today. We're talking the S&P 500, we're talking about crude oil, and we're talking about bonds. And I would say what we saw today is today we saw CPI come out a little bit lower than expected. Just remember, last month CPI was substantially lower than expected, and so tomorrow we'll have the PPI. We'll see if that's prints at or below expectations. And what that really means is that the Fed really has no excuses over the next couple months really to be taking their foot off the brake here on rates. I mean, so they are positioned to cut rates, and so I just want to throw that out there. And so obviously all this tariff talk that people have been talking about, it's really not coming through in inflation yet. It may come through, but it hasn't as of yet. So that's point number one. I think the second thing is what has happened this week. This week has been all about tariffs, right? The deal with China, obviously, it's only a 90-day deal, but that was the big behemoth that had to get out of the way. Markets rallied on that, and so we're probably going to go sideways here. We'll probably see some more deals happening, but volatility has come down quite substantial. Remember, we talked about volatility going from like a 20 measure on a volatility index to around 60, which was almost at 5, 6, 7-year highs. Now we're back below that, and now we're to the lows of the year. So volatility has come off quite substantially. And the only reason I mention that is that when volatility gets this low, that gets me worried, right? Because it seems like no one's expecting anything crazy happening in the markets. And so I think what we've gone is the volatility being so low that expected there's going to be some unexpected things, and it could create a lot of a market volatility. The last thing I'd probably say here right now is, one of the discussions we had last week was, just crude oil. Crude oil went from basically $73 on April 2nd, Trump's day of liberation, to a low of 55. Now it's back to $63. We obviously had Diamondback with a letter to shareholders last week talking about, maturing U.S. shale. And it seems like a little bit, so that's kind of been pushed to the side a little bit. We've heard some companies talk about, deferring spending this year, but no wholesale really cuts to the rig count yet or CapEx spending. And given, crude oil is at $63 now, that kind of tone is going to kind of die off here. So that's interesting to me. I think the last thing I'd say what's happened this week, Aramco had the results this week, pretty good results. It talked about, the 400,000 barrels a day of production out there. My guess is with prices back where they're at, I would not be surprised if we see in July another 400,000 barrels a day come onto market. So something to think about. Last thing, the big event this week in our markets was NRG buying LS Power. $12 billion deal for roughly 13 gigawatts of natural gas generation. That, if you remember, about in early January, we saw basically Constellation Energy buy Calpine for about 27 billion for about 27 gigawatts of power. All I'm saying is that there is a lot of interest in companies basically getting natural gas generation and generation in general. And so that continues to be a really, really, topical area. And so we'll just go ahead and leave it at that. I mean, like I said, a lot of the stress in the system, a lot of the volatility has been, come out of the system. And so it's now really about earnings. But guess what? Earnings are behind us. We're not going to see earnings for another, 60, 70, 80 days from now. So I think markets are going to kind of go sideways.
Awesome. Well, Francesco, it's great to have you and to jump in and talk to you about the various things happening in the world. I think one of the ways we got to know you was we were just following you on LinkedIn and seeing you're great about, you share a view and then you've almost always got a map, which illustrates the nuances of the problem. And it could be Spain, or it could be Nord Stream 2, or it could be the Norway power interconnect. It could be anything. You're always great about showing the map, which illustrates the geopolitical issues around this. There's so much happening in today's world. How are you keeping up? What are the main things on your mind? What are you watching for as the next thing? What's happening in your life?
So you are absolutely right, and there's a lot happening all around the world. I think, and I guess that there's always have been so much happening all around the world. It's just that energy markets came to realize in the last 2 to 3 to 4 years how political variables, political issues, political events are so influential for the short term, the medium term, the long term destiny of energy markets. Whoever is involved in energy production, generation, distribution, consumption, and obviously investments should be interested in political events, political dynamics happening all around the world, because we still live in very interdependent markets in terms of energy, and this interdependency is the source of current, future, and past leverages, which could be also influencing directly energy stakeholders.
I think what you just said, that makes total sense to us. It's we might not have described it as well as you did, but that's exactly how we feel. As you trace why politics and geopolitics are now so important in energy, I'll try a gross generalization and see if you agree. A lot of the politics of energy, they were grounded in decarbonization efforts, where governments were trying to inject certain approaches, certain flavors, certain results. They were trying to push those through policy. And then once they did that, one of the unintended consequences was volatility. Another one was vulnerability. And then that started to make national security issues more apparent. And then that draws more sort of government implications. And of course, all of this is amongst competitive economies where if you have cheaper power, you're going to have more industry. And the reverse is true. How do you think about how we got here? Like why in 2010, we would not have been talking about, just to pick a date, we would not have been talking about as much politics and geopolitics and energy, I think. But why do you think we're here?
Yeah, I think that we are here because of systemic variables and systemic issues changing and the equilibrium changing pretty much over the last 15 years. We had the United States becoming the sole and truly superpower around the world. And right now, there are other superpowers, established superpowers, at least China is such. And the influence of China on global energy geopolitics stretches all over the world, from Latin America to Africa, to the southeast of Asia, but also in Europe, because you have energy interdependencies between China and many European countries from a technological perspective, from an economic perspective, from a trade perspective, from a manufacturing perspective regarding of renewables and green energy sources. The world has become more interdependent. And this is also a result of the dynamics that you mentioned before. The energy transition has changed energy mixes. There are new sources that are pretty much more relevant compared to a decade ago, 15 years ago. And then it came the COVID crisis, the pandemic, and then came the energy crisis all over the world, but stemming from China and not from the Russian invasion of Ukraine. This is a later event. Everything started there in China with huge amount of money spent, public spending, and rising energy consumption from China, from Asia, and influencing Europe, the United States. We had the luck of having three warmer winters in a row. The last one was not so in Europe, at least, and we had a revamp of natural gas prices after the crumbling of the EU-Russia energy interdependency. So we had a lot of happenings, a lot of events in the last 2 or 3 years that are not very directly even correlated to geopolitics, because the COVID pandemic was not a geopolitical event, but the implications of the pandemic, well, they were a lot geopolitical in nature.
One thing I think that, just to switch gears on you, that comes up a lot, you made me think of it when you were talking about Europe and gas, is it seems like for a long time, maybe the Europeans have gotten better, but they haven't been willing to commit for long periods of time to using natural gas, right? That's always been kind of an issue. And that subjects them to the spot market. Like there's issues when you won't, do a multi-decade type commitment. But the other issue, of course, that comes up is Russian gas. And is Russian gas, the opinions on Russian gas seem to be all over the map. On one hand, it's right there, and if we had peace, surely they would use it because it's cheap and available. And at the other end of the spectrum, you see opinions which are, we'll do a lot of things in life, but we have to get off of Russian gas and Russian energy, forever. How do you see that debate playing out, and where's the realism? Because there's always, people saying certain things, but what do you think is going to happen there?
Well, I think that to understand realism, it starts with understanding policymakers and what they are trying to do right now. And in Europe, there is this one vector: get off, phase out the dependency on Russian gas. This has been implemented with the REPowerEU strategy. It was published just weeks after the first Russian invasion of Ukraine. It doesn't just say that the dependency on Russian gas is bad. It also says that the dependency on natural gas is bad for the climate ambitions of Europe, the energy security of Europe, which is pretty much different compared to just phase out Russian gas. And right now you have also a roadmap that has been published like 10 days ago, maybe less, for phasing out this Russian gas dependency, because it's still there. Europe has not get rid of all Russian gas imports, even though it has obviously slashed the total amount of Russian gas imported in Europe. But paradoxically, it has increased Russian gas imports both by pipeline and by LNG in 2024 compared to 2023. So where is Europe going right now?
Could I just ask you, maybe, can you just give us the number for how much of Europe's gas is coming from Russia today, approximately?
So in 2024 is like 32 billion cubic meters from pipeline gas, and around 25 billion cubic meters through LNG. And yeah, the fact that some Russian LNG coming to Europe is also then exported to Asia adds some complexity to the overall global LNG market. There are also new sanctions coming from Europe and trying to stop this opaque LNG trade from Europe towards Asia. Yeah, it is also very, very important.
And so the gas that comes into Europe, the Russian gas that comes into Europe and is used there, how much would you guess that would be as a percentage of all European gas?
Oh, well, compared to the overall imports is between 15% and 20%. It was in 2024. It depends on the statistics, and the official ones are not yet out. We still need some months. This is obviously this will go down in 2025 because the Ukraine transit is not there anymore. But still, Russia is trying to exploit some other ways and routes for exporting natural gas to Europe, and especially through Turkey.
Maybe we could ask you what happened in Spain. I know that's something that you've been talking about. Of course, we all were, but it was a major event, and then it's in today's world. It's gone from the screen, so we've stopped talking about it a little bit. How did what happened in Spain affect, you think, other policymakers in Europe? What's the takeaway? Is that a big, meaningful event in energy policy going forward?
Well, I would say that for Europe, yeah, it was a very concerning event because Spain is brandished as an example for European policymakers that are willing to commit to the energy transition in the medium and the long term. Spain has invested a lot in solar power, has invested a lot in wind energy, is willing to invest a lot in the construction of an hydrogen backbone, green hydrogen production, green hydrogen transmission, and the interconnections with other countries in Europe. So the blackout is very concerning because, again, Spain is an example, and also because the blackout affected also all other countries in Europe. The blackout spread from Spain to Portugal, which is at the same time dependent on the Spanish energy system. And then you have seen another country with an immediate, almost immediate blackout, no possibility to disconnect from the Spanish energy grid, electricity grid, and also political consequences because of this. Right now, and for quite a few days, like at least a week, Portugal has reduced the power imports from Spain because it was saying, okay, let's see what is happening. We don't want this to happen again in Portugal. And you have also a country that is coming closer to elections. And also this is becoming an issue discussed in the Portuguese politics and the connection with Spain. On the other hand, on the eastern side of the Iberian Peninsula, you have a huge nuclear power producer, France, that has somehow diversified electricity imports right in the moment when Spain disconnected from the grid and the interconnection with France. And in the hours after the blackout, you had French electricity exported to Spain, so sustaining the needs of Spanish people and Spanish consumers without the access to electricity for hours and hours and hours. And this is also changing, mutating, transforming the way that nuclear power is seen in Spain, because the Spanish government wants to get rid also of nuclear power production in the next decade.
So do you think the trend in Europe, this is going to be impossible to answer, but only you could answer it, is the trend towards any given country disconnecting and trying to do more on their own? Or is the trend towards we need to have more system-wide connectivity so that we can eliminate some of these problems? And I guess this is a Western European question in particular, but which way is the momentum? Is it towards doing more yourself and being less reliant on the country next to you, or is it towards more interconnections and more system-wide thinking?
I think there are two dynamics at play here. One is the European Union funded interconnectivity. You have so many projects funded by the European Commission all around Europe between nuclear powered countries such as Sweden or France, between renewable powered countries such as Germany and Spain, and other mixes, energy mixes like Italy. This is one dynamic. It's happening at the European level, and some governments are also very much funded of this narrative. In other countries, energy nationalism is rising alongside with right-wing populism. Some parties are investing also in this narrative of disconnecting from the European grid and investing more on what we at the national level can have in terms of energy production and electricity generation. Our sources are better than imported sources. And this is very concerning, not just for the direction of the energy union, because the European Union hoped to build an energy union that was securing energy supplies for all the 27 members, but also cheap energy and possibly green energy for these countries. If energy nationalism is rising all across Europe, and maybe in some particular countries that are very important for interconnections within the European Union, this is going to be a very big problem. And I hope that the way of the European authorities to handle these implications of the energy crisis, because we are still talking about energy crisis here. It didn't left the table. We still need to explain, to tell people how energy crisis could affect their own living standards. And people from Spain and Portugal have recently understood this. We need to handle this crisis, this turbulence, as a political event and not just an energy event. This is the leap forward that we need to do in Europe, but I guess, and I hope also this will become a global debate and not just remain within Europe. Also because Europe is a model that some other countries in the world and other regions in the world are following in order to commit to the energy transition, right? So we need to also explain to others the political implications of this.
This is a terrible question, because I don't know how you're going to answer this, Dr. Sassi, but do you think across Europe, the population all across, and I guess I mean Western Europe, is energy transition or energy costs, which one of those do you think is the bigger issue in the mind of the Western European public at this point?
At this point in time, I think energy costs. I think energy costs, and you are seeing this because the narrative of the main parties influencing European politics has changed much over the last few years, and energy costs has become one of the most debated topic in national elections. Political parties are committing their establishment to lower energy costs for industries, for households, and so voters are expecting results. If they are not able to bring results in very short term, you could also see you are already saw actually economic consequences, industrial crisis and energy demand reduced in some industrial sectors because of the rising energy costs and the reduced competitiveness between the European economy and the Chinese one and the American one, but not just these ones. So to achieve lower energy costs, you need also to somehow water down some other commitments to the energy transition. How much is this possible in the current political scenario within Europe? There is not an easy response to this question. This is not easy. And in current and future crisis, energy crisis, geopolitical crisis, economic crisis could affect this balance even more. And because of the interconnectivity of the global energy, the next crisis might not happen in Europe, but might have consequences for European policymakers and voters.
Dr. Sassi, you have Trump is in Saudi Arabia today. I can't recall who the last president that visited Saudi Arabia, but it may have been Trump. I guess the question for you is, what is the significance of him being there, both in the short term and long term? And then I'll follow that up with another question.
Well, it is not just Saudi Arabia; it is also Qatar and United Arab Emirates. So the Persian Gulf is a very strategic region where Trump's energy and international politics play together, and not just as separate fields. In the commitment of Trump in order to achieve a ceasefire between Hamas and Israel, but also to achieve a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine. These countries are very interested in raising their stakes in the international diplomacy, speak to Russia and speak to Kiev, speak to Moscow, speak to Kiev at the same time, and play on very different tables at the same time because of their energy prowess. And also you have seen a lot of new investments in AI, in energy announced today, and maybe some others will come tomorrow and the day after. The Middle East is a huge place where technology, security, energy, economics come together and embody different vectors of the same international political objective and strategy for the Trump administration.
Yeah, I kind of been corrected by Maynard. I think he just said it in July 2022 that Biden visited Saudi Arabia, so I'm mistaken on that. But I guess the second question I would have is just OPEC plus policy. When I think about OPEC plus policy, prior to OPEC plus, you had a war with Moscow and essentially Saudi Arabia, resulting in oil prices going to negative prices. OPEC plus was formed. But since then, you really have OPEC plus abdicating their production, right, to other parts of the world. And what we're seeing right now, is surprised some people, took oil from 73 down to 63 at one point, was that Saudi Arabia, OPEC plus, is saying, you know what, we're not going to do this. We're going to probably go after market share. They've increased by almost 800,000 barrels a day here over the last couple months versus 300,000 expectations. They might put another 400,000. What can we read from OPEC plus at this point? Are they sitting there saying, okay, we think demand is going to be better than people expected? Do they think that the U.S. is going to be maturing and so we have some room to do this? What are the thought process here in your mind about policy from OPEC plus and specifically Saudi Arabia?
I think right now the problem for OPEC plus is, first of all, legitimacy within the group and the lead stance of Saudi Arabia and Russia, and the commitment by other members, and in particular Kazakhstan and Iraq, to lower production. Otherwise, it is not sustainable anymore to have a political alliance that does not bear economic results. Because oil prices are too low for the Saudi economy. And this is becoming a very strategic concern for Riyadh, and not just in terms of economic implications and the impacts on Aramco, but you will also see strategic commitment to the energy transition, to the development of AI, watering down, because this is not sustainable anymore. And the investments that Riyadh has promised to Saudi, but also international partners within the country, are not sustainable anymore if prices get so low. At the same time, you have the message going out, OPEC plus, right? You have many non-OPEC plus and non-OPEC countries increasing production all around the world. You have not just the United States, you have Canada, you have Brazil, you have Guyana in Latin America, another very interesting new oil player all around the world. There are many others. The message going out is we still have the power to influence your economic and political trajectory. This is not just an economic power, this has political consequences. This is a very enormous economic statecraft, somehow power play by Saudi Arabia, but coordinated also with Russia. Let's just not forget that Russia is in play here.
What do you think on this topic, Dr. Sassi? Because the other thing that's happening this week is pretty amazing. Is Putin is going to sit down with Zelensky, and if you listen to some of the rhetoric, at least out of the White House, a little bit, the suggestion is made that lower oil prices will help bring Putin to the table. Maybe, maybe not. Like, how do you see? Let's talk about Ukraine, that Putin-Zelensky meeting, and also how, when you have oil prices down for a while, is that Russia's desire to punish other players, or is that to Russia's detriment and something that's making them come to the table?
Well, today is Tuesday, and the meeting should be happening on Thursday. I will tell you how committed is Putin to sit around the table once I see him on the television. And before that, I won't be pledging about his participation in the summit. The Kremlin has not promised his presence, not yet. He has said to be open to negotiations, which is another story and another political set to be played. I think that also for Moscow, lower energy prices, oil prices are concerning, not in the same way that Saudi Arabia is looking at the energy markets. Break-even prices for oil production in Russia are actually lower compared to Saudi Arabia. And the Kremlin's bureaucracy has worked very well in these last few years in order to build some kind of economic fortress around Russia and the energy industry of Russia, in order that the budget of companies is maybe reduced because of lower oil prices, but not the Kremlin's coffers. So the war machine could keep going. This is I think the main objective, the main goal, and the main aim of the overall energy policies of the Kremlin right now. And I'm not so sure that lower oil prices are so concerning for Moscow as they are actually right now for Riyadh.
You know, right in the midst of all of this, in tariffs and Ukraine, Russia, and all the things that have been going on, we suddenly had this India-Pakistan fight, and now it seems to have subsided. What is your take on that? Where did that come from? How does that fit in? If it fits in, how might it play a role? Like, what do you think of a conflict like that?
This is another hotspot that should never be forgotten, because India and Pakistan fought at least 3 major wars in the last decades, and the tensions are still there, even though they reach a ceasefire. Because before the beginning of jet fighters introducing into each other territory, there was this announcement that India has somehow refused to respect this Indus Water Treaty that was signed back in the 70s. And because of the interdependency between the two countries at the water and hydro level, because some of the affluents of the Indus River originates within India, and the Indus River is so much important for grain and agriculture in Pakistan. You have India right now that could in fact declare some kind of water war or water conflict against Pakistan, refusing to respect this water treaty, and started to build dams and hydropower facilities in the segment of the Indus River that belongs to India in the Kashmir region. Again, so the Kashmir will stay there as an hotspot between the two countries, and energy plays a direct role in the possible conflict between the two countries and the tensions that will still continue to flow between New Delhi and Islamabad.
So you mentioned elections and their importance. And I was just thinking about this year, a few of the elections we've seen. We saw the German election, which I don't know, you might say that the country went in sort of a conservative direction, perhaps. I don't know how you'd characterize that one. The Canadian election, it was sort of a come from behind, surprising, perhaps, vote for the establishment party. And then in Australia, something similar seems to have happened. And you know, some of these things are characterized as, you know, you're either having reactions which are similar to what happened in the US, or you're having a reaction which is almost a counter. You know, the candidate who's the least like Trump perhaps wins. What do you make of these elections we've had, and what are the next elections on your radar that you think are really important to watch?
Well, I think that more than the expected elections, we must be ready to have more elections than before, because of the political and economic instability injects political instability within democracies all around.
You mean in the parliamentary system, you're just going to see more governments have to go back to the
because the energy crisis is also injecting more economic instability, and so political instability within many regions, and mostly in Europe, because Europe is still living through an energy crisis. So again, the energy issue, energy topics, the energy transition, but also energy security will come at the very top of the decisions that voters will have to policymakers all around Europe, and governments will need to build their political platforms around energy policies and energy topics. So this might also change the approach that in Europe we have in balancing energy security and transition goals. Obviously, you have elections all around the world. And I think that the Trump administration has somehow changed the view and still the balance between energy security objectives and maybe foreign policy objectives in countries surrounding the United States. You have seen that in Canada, but you might also see that in Central America or in Latin America. One other very important hotspot for energy geopolitics is Panama. We have heard a lot about talking about Panama, and we might also see more energy injected in the political system within these countries that are important choke points. They're not middle powers, they're not great powers, they are little countries, but they play a very important role in global energy trade or global energy production, such as Qatar, as an example. And Highland State, which is one of a major LNG producer and exporter, and which role is going just to increase because of the consequences of the energy crisis around the world. The only thing is that in Qatar, you won't see elections coming soon.
Francesco, you got my juices flowing when you said Panama, since I was born and raised there. But we'll go a little bit further south of Panama. We'll talk about Argentina, sort of the economic miracle that is become. It looks like they obviously got the 15 billion IMF loan here a couple months ago, whatever the case may be. And so maybe just to get a thought about where you think that country is. We talked about elections as well. I think they're going to have some elections later this year. Talk about Milei, where he's at politically. Talk about the country. Maybe talk about it. Are you surprised that they've been able to get as much done, and where do you see that over the next 6-9 months?
Well, over the last couple of years, Argentina has become some sort of a new country. Milei has somehow changed the political equation that drove policymakers in Argentina for decades. Argentina has shifted from a position of political entente with neighbors such as Brazil, but also Chile, to a more global view of the interest of Argentina outside Latin America. And recently, one of the major things that caught my attention was that Israeli companies are going to Argentina in order to bring this technology to extract lithium from the lithium triangle between Chile, Argentina, and Bolivia. And this is very new, not just because of the technology and the intention to go in the lithium triangle, extracting these resources, but doing this with Israeli technology has a political meaning and maybe some political implications beyond that in the relationship between Argentina, a Latin American country within a region that has been so critics of the decisions of Israel over the last couple of years. So again, energy, mineral resources are an instrument of somehow shifting traditional positions, traditional foreign policies of these countries that have abundant resources but no technology, no economic meanings of extracting these resources and bring them to global markets. So again, a policymaker of this disruptive force such as Milei has done this, and maybe we will see other implications coming, not just from Argentina but from the Latin America country. You also see Colombia changing pretty much the policies and foreign policy stances and the position with and the relationship with the United States and turning towards China. You will see energy consequences because of this. And energy again is an instrument and an objective of geopolitical tensions. So this double role of energy has not been quite very understood by policymakers, and I think this is by policymakers and stakeholders also. Let me say this, and this is also why we need to study energy geopolitics, energy geoeconomics so much in the next future, because this will be and will remain a major variable in determining energy strategies and energy policies all around the world. We are not just talking about the US, we are not just talking about Europe, China. This is not a concern just of great powers, but all countries around the world are concerned and should be concerned about these topics.
I was wondering, Dr. Sassi, because you're pointing to sort of like the Argentina-Israel example, you're sort of pointing to the world reorienting or moving into different teams compared to where we used to be. So for instance, the US signed this trade deal with the UK. Is it possible that Europe, because Europe is not all the same, Eastern Europe different from Western Europe, places within Western Europe, they're not all the same. Norway is different from Portugal, obviously, just to pick obvious names. But do you think that we're going to see just some really unique realignment of countries and alliances and friendships? I mean, you mentioned Colombia turning towards China and away from the US. What are some other unique reorientations might we see in terms of alliances or economic cooperation?
Well, I'm has many very concerned about transatlantic relationships and the relationship between Washington and the capitals all around Europe has become more tense because of the Trump administration. But I would say that there are also global dynamics, and the competition between the European economy and the Chinese economy is also a major issue in somehow realigning positions and allegiances at the geopolitical level all around the world. I don't think that we will see a very fixed scenario soon. I think these dynamics, this dynamism, will stay there for long, and even maybe after the Trump era will end, or that a new commission, a new European Commission will come up in 2028. These geopolitical crises all around the world, coupled with economic crisis and energy crisis, are injecting much more dynamism all around the world. I don't think that we will be able to settle like a scenario where in a couple of years we are just seeing the United States and, as an example, Middle Eastern countries coupling together and driving global energy policies for long. We are not going to see that scenario soon because the interest of different countries within the same region are somehow very difficult to reach a compromise. I won't bet that the Saudi Arabia and Iran will be able to realign their regional interests, but certainly diplomacy has become bigger. Has become more relevant between also these two countries that have been on the very opposite sides of regional geopolitics for so long. And this could also have regional energy implications.
Well, I know we're going to lose you here. It's amazing when you think about the variety of stuff that came up on this geopolitical menu. I guess maybe as we close, your last comment about, this is not going to go away, this world we're living in. Is that another way of saying this sort of what you might call every man for himself foreign policy? This is the new world we live in, and it's going to stay volatile because what's in any country's best interest is always going to be moving around, and sometimes you're friends with this one and sometimes you're friends with that one. And we're just going to live in this volatile world because we don't have these, like the Cold War had these big unifying structures to it. And now we don't have that. And we're just going to live in this constantly changing every country for himself type approach. Is that how you think about it?
Yeah, well, preferences at the national level will be certainly more relevant going forward. A multipolar world order is there to come, and we are already seeing this at the regional level in the Middle East, in Latin America, in Asia. You have sub-regional levels and tensions and geopolitical competitions within South Asia, Southeast Asia, Northeast Asia. But one thing that could actually transform in a positive way these scenarios is the fact that energy markets invite to have energy interdependencies, and so political interdependencies between countries. I think this is the real crux, the real strategic issue that needs to be understood. Oil production, natural gas production, green industries manufacturing could not think about the political consequences of their actions, of their short and medium long-term strategies. And they also need to understand that their role in the political scenario at the international level is much more relevant than before. It's much more important, it's much more strategic because of the energy crisis and the implications and what we have seen in Europe, but not just in Europe. This might be a positive way to not to build blocks and peaceful blocks around the world, but to build positive energy interdependencies.
No, fascinating. I was just thinking one of your comments, if I heard you right, was that thinking about your energy at a more of a national level and not wanting to be dependent or interconnected, at least in Europe, that sort of thinking is identified with, quote, right-wing political thinking. I think that's what you suggested, which is sort of fascinating. Like, why did energy is now getting, I guess the good news is it could solve some political problems and bring people together, but the bad news is it's now certain energy opinions have become associated with certain political opinions, and that's maybe not that helpful.
Yeah, well, but not necessarily, because if you think about strategic autonomy and increasing the European strategic autonomy, there are policymakers in Europe thinking that investing in green supply chains is increasing the strategic autonomy of Europe. But this is still a geopolitical event. You have to battle to fight the Chinese overpower in these sectors. Yeah. How can you do so? How can you overcompete Chinese when at the same time you are investing and proposing a market economy and not a state-driven economy in Europe? This is an issue that policymakers have to answer to.
My takeaway from all this, guys, is this is really complicated stuff, and I'm really glad we have friends like you, Dr. Sassi, to help us figure it out.
Thanks.
We really enjoyed having you on the show. Please come visit us in Houston. We'll come see you. Thanks so much for your friendship.
As soon as possible, I will be there.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody.